0. Okay. So let's see. Okay. So we talk about, in the previous lecture, we talk about tickets, and then we talk about access control list, ACL, and then we talk about delegation, right? Okay. So the logic aspect of tickets, ACL, and delegation. And you'll know, right, that those logic, you need to have those fundamental, right, to fully understand what is written in this paper. Okay, so it was my plan that I'm going to first talk about ticket, ACL, delegations, and this paper. Okay. Okay, so now, okay. So that is another delegations, right? So I need to rename delegation part 2. Okay. So now let's talk about this paper, right? And okay, before we talk about this paper, right? Let's just summarize X509 because okay, X509. Just briefly, let's just review. Okay. Just briefly review X509. Let's see if there's anything that I need to. Okay. X509, right? I think it's X509. Okay. So X509, it's really like that's why we learn, right? So like the core idea of X509 is basically the digital certificate, right? Okay. So in the digital certificate, right? Let's say we have a message M, right? In this message, there is a couple of components in the message, right? First is issuer, right? And then the next is what? Subject. And then the third element is what? The public key of that subject, right? And then expiration date, right? So that's like a message. And then you hash that message, H of M, right? And this is signed by whom? The issuer, right? So this certificate is really like message M, comma, and then hash of M, right? Signed by issuer's public key. I mean, sorry, the private key, right? So you know that this square bracket means what? The private key, right? So I don't have to say issuer's private key. The square bracket means the private key, right? Okay, so that's a notation that we decide to use, right? That's like contract between you and me, right? Okay, so that's it, right? Okay, now this one is a little bit long, right? I mean, this is what we learned, but let me just let's just what I like to do is I want to really condense this format, right? This seems like there are a couple of things that we can eliminate. Well, let's just eliminate the expiration date. It's not really important, right? I mean, for the sake of this project, okay? For the sake of this class, I'm not going to really talk much about the expiration date, right? Okay, and then, so I'm not going to really, okay, so we can eliminate the expiration date. And then if you see this, right, we assume that the message is sent along with the signature, right? So maybe, right, this could be even condensed to, let's say, okay, another thing is maybe we can eliminate the issuer, right? Because issuer is signed, right? The issuer's private key is here, right? So I think at the end, right? At the end, we can really condense this down to maybe this down to, let's say this is square bracket. So everything in that is going to be signed instead of a hash, right? we're gonna just expand. So basically, we can say subject, right, comma, and then public key, right, and then subject, and then that is signed by issuer, right? Okay, so from now on, sometimes this is, I will say, this is what, this is expanded, expanded version or the long version of this certificate M, and you know that M is this, right? So this is what we learned, right? And I think I will call it, this is condensed version of the X509 digital certificates. Okay, so from now on, I'm gonna call it, this is a condensed version of X509 digital, right, certificate. Okay, so I give you an example. So let's say the VeriSign is an issuer. So the VeriSign, the VeriSign's issues, right, the digital certificate, for the Alice. Okay, so that means, by the way, subject means a subject name, actually, right? So here's the Alice, or the alice.com, or XYZ. So the subject name usually is domain name, okay? But let's say Alice or alice.com, and then the public key, pub key dash Alice, right? And then signs by whom? VeriSign. Okay, and let's just use another example, like a driver license. Okay, driver license is signed by whom? The California DMV, right? California Digital, I think it's a Department of Motor Vehicle, I guess, right? CA is signed by DMV, right? And then let's say here's me, right? My name, right? And then what? Digital, digital, the public key, for the driver license, it's right. It's my face, right? The picture. So, and here's my face. I'm wearing the glasses, and then it's my hair, right? My smiling, right? This is my face, right? Basically, this is my the public key, right? So this is like driver license. This is just an example, okay? Okay, so any questions about this condensed version of X509 digital certificate? So I just condense really to the minimum, but at least these are the things that you should have in the digital certificate, right? It's really like, right? Issuer's private key is signed, right? Signed what? It signs the subject name, and it's the public key of that subject, right? So basically what it says that is the issuer, right, proclaims what? This is this subject's what? Public key, right? So there's a binding, right? There's a binding. That's what really this issuer is claiming, and that's what he really signs for, right? So the issuer signs for, right? So for example, the VeriSign proclaims that this is Alice public key, right? Some long number 1010, it's like a really long key, right? That is the Alice public key, right? And then yeah, so the VeriSigns, that's what the VeriSigns signs for, okay? And there's a binding. Okay, so any questions about the condensed version of X509 digital certificates? Okay. Okay, good. Now, let's talk about this delegation certificates. Okay. From now on, we're going to call it as a delegation certificate or the authorization certificate. Okay. So I'm going to call it as the what? The authorization. And by the way, this X509 it's now is used everywhere, right? You know, your SSL use it. That means your HTTPS is using this, right? This as X509 digital certificates, right? So it's pretty much everywhere. Every time you go to the Amazon or eBay, every time you enter your credit card number, basically they're using the digital certificates, right? Now it's everywhere. But authorization certificates is not as popular as the X509 digital certificate. However, it may, right now it's like people are paying attention to this delegation certificate because of what? Because of the IoT, Internet of Things, right? Okay, so it's not been a popular, but it has a potential, right? So it has authorization, or I call it as a delegation certificates, okay? So either authorization or delegation certificate, right? Either way is fine. Okay, now it says now there's access control mechanisms such as SPKI. This is very popular protocol, SPKI, right? And now the new distributed access control mechanisms such as SPKI and blah blah blah, right? And okay, so this SPKI, it's one form of authorization certificates, and it's probably when people talk about authorization certificates, maybe 80-90% of the time they are really talking about the SPKI. Okay, 80 to 90%. However, in this paper, they don't really talk about SPKI in particular, right? In this paper, basically they explain the general concept of authorization or the delegation certificate, just general concept. So you can say this paper can talk about general concept of SPKI. Okay, you can say that too, because authorization, because when people talk about authorization and delegation certificate, 80 or 90% of the time they talk about SPKI. Okay, but they don't really introduce the format of SPKI. Rather, this paper just talk about the general concept of authorization certificates. Okay, so now let's look at the next page. Okay, so this is the main thing. Okay, so this diagram is pretty much everything. Okay, so let's just draw this diagram, right? This diagram said, right? So this is a delegation certificate or the authorization certificate, delegation certificate, right? And it has subject, right? And then, but subject is represented as its public key. So there's like a pub key subject, right? And then so that subject is represented as a public key of the subject. And then here is they have some kind of, I'll say R, the access rights, okay, or the authorization right. So they put the authorization, all right, or the access right, okay. You can think as this is access right. You know, for example, let's say read object 1, or write or object 1 or execute, right? So that's like access rights. Okay, and then so there's an expiration date, like a time period, and then the signed by the signer, issuer. Okay, so this is this issuer is, or okay, another important thing is this issuer is not just name of the issuer, it's it's key, right? Okay, so this the signed the key, that's like issuer. Okay. So of course there's an expiration date or the period. They call it period, but it's not really important. So I'm not gonna write it. Okay. So that's the main component of the authorization or the delegation certificates. Okay. Now let's just like we have condensed version of X509 digital certificate, right? We can a little bit condense this, right? Okay, so let's say there is a period, right? Like this is valid, from like August 2020 to August 2025, right, etc. Okay. You know what? From now on, right? From now on, I know that this is like a general form, and if you read this paper, they express this concept as this one, right? But this is too long, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretty much, I'm going to follow, right? Key oriented, okay. Good, okay. Okay, so this is like next important diagram. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to condense this, okay? Just like the previous, version, in previous example. So the reason, okay, I'm going to say that, okay, the subject, right, the public key, right? Let's say if if the public key is K prime, right? And then this is signed by the issuer's private key, right? K. And then another assumption. This is very important assumption. In the context of the authorization and delegation certificate, right? In the context, one of the most important assumption is that all the subject, that's including the issuer, right? And that's including the object. They are all represented as what? Is a public key. So they don't really use the name like Alice, Bob, or the Casey or XYZ.com. Then they don't really use the name. Instead, they're assuming that every object and every subject, including the issuer, they can be represented as their own unique public key, right? Okay, there's a couple of reasons, but I'm gonna skip that reason. Okay, but one of the reasons is, for example, when you say Jake, right? We don't know, is that Jake at what? Is it in the United States or England, right? We don't have any idea, right? Even in the United States, right? How many Jakes? There are many Jake, right? Even Cal State, we probably have a couple of Jakes, right? Even in our department, IDS department, we may have a couple of Jake, right? So it could be very ambiguous and could be a name conflict. So one of the reason so that's why, this is like one of the reason. The one of the reason is they're using, instead of a Jake, they're not going to use a name. Instead, they're going to use what? Pub key, the public key of Jake. Okay. So so that's the most important assumptions. They're using what? They're using the public key. They're not going to use any name. And that's why the K prime and K, okay? So now that's very important assumption. Okay. Having said that, this can be condensed as what? This is condensed something like, if I just extract most important components, the K prime, right, which is a subject. So this is what? This is public key. Let's just, the public key, right? So this is like public key, K prime. And this is a resource, this is like access authorization right, R, right? This is authorization R. And then this is signed by what? Issuer, right? So that's like a K. You know that this is what? This means the public key, right? I mean, sorry, it's signed by what? Private key, right? The square bracket. But I use a K because I cannot really use a name, right? In this context. So I use this means what? This means K is what? Private key, right? And this is signed, right? And what is signed? Two things are signed mainly. The subject and then authorization right. Those two are signed by issuers what? The private key. Right? So I'll just say this is what? This is condensed version of the authorizations and delegation certificates. Okay? So any question? Okay, so I'll give you an example. And then this is why we need to have authorization certificate. Okay? So if you look at the previous case, X509 digital certificate, the main goal is really like binding, right? Hey, so basically issuer saying that the very sign said that, hey, trust me, this is what? This is a genuine Alice public key, right? And there's a binding, right? So if he wants to, so the thing is, one of the goal of the digital certificate X is what? It's the same thing, right? The binding, and then like basically not another goal. It's basically the same thing. So the reason that the VeriSign create these digital certificates, right? Or the reason that we have this digital certificate is what? Distribute genuine public key of Alice, right? Through the digital certificate. So that's a genuine. That's like a main goal, right? In this authorization delegation certificate, the main goal is not that. Its main goal is what? It's authorizations, right? Authorization right, right? And so basically it means, roughly it means K, issuer, right? Delegate. So we learned about the delegation, right? The issuer delegates whom? I mean delegates access right R to whom? The K prime. So that K can access, the K, right? Now K has the access right R. Okay, so that's the main goal. Okay, so delegation, right? Issuer delegates this access right to whom? The subject. Okay, so I'll show the example. Example, let's say we have a God, right? Okay, so by the way, we have a God. And God is protecting a resource. Let's say this is object O, right? So let's say this is like object O1. So let's say this is object O1, right? And God is protecting this object. And there is an owner, right? Owner of this object, right? This owner, right? And by the way, God can be the owner, right? So in this case, I just make it separate, but God is typically the owner, right? But you can have a separate owner. It really does not matter. And then owner and God, they trust each other, of course, right? Because the God is protecting this object for the owner, right? So owner definitely trusts the God, okay? And God obviously knows what? The owner's public key, right? Pub key. You know what? I'll just say the K owner. So every time when I say K, it's the K owner, right? So that's like a public key, right? Unless I use the key under, like use with the square bracket, that's the private key, right? But otherwise, this is usually a public key. Only time that I use the K as a private key is like if I use with this square bracket, right? So this is like a public key. So the God knows the public key of the owner, right? Okay. So any question? So now there's a Kevin, Oh, you know what? Let's just use Alice and Bob. Okay, so let's say there's a Bob, right? And owner trusts a Bob, right? And then owner knows that Bob. Oh, I know the Bob. You know, Bob is really good guy, right? So what I'm going to do is so the owner issues a digital certificate, authorization certificate to whom? To Bob. And what owner is trying to do is this. The K owner, by the way, this is public key, right? This is public key. The K owner delegates I'll just write it here. Okay. So what the owner is trying to do is K owner, because everything is every subject, every object, every like issuer, it's represented as its own their own public key, right? So K owner. So this is owner's public key delegates. Let's say access right is read, and then it's object 1, right? This is access right to whom? To K Bob. And by the way, this is a public key, right? So in this context, everything, when I say K, that's like a public key, right? Except that if the key is used with a square bracket, then that's a private key, right? Otherwise, everything is public key, right? Okay. So this is something that he wants to do so that the K Bob is able to access this object, O1. Okay? So this owner, right? That's what owner wants to do, right? Delegate this access right to K Bob so that K Bob can access this O1. Okay? So now I'm going to put the certificate that is going to be issued by owner is this. The K Bob read object 1. And by the way, this is not really written like this in the paper. I'm just making up, okay? Access right. And then I'm just this paper does not really explain this way, but especially using this notation. But anyway, the K Bob and the access right, and then signed by whom? Signed by the issuer, which is K owner. So in this case, this K owner is what? It's a private key because it's used with this square bracket. Okay? And this certificate is issued to whom? To Bob. You know what? Actually, it's not Bob. You have to say K Bob, because everything is represented as a public key, right? So this authorization certificate is issued to whom? K Bob. So any question? You know what? We learned about tickets, right? Remember tickets? You can think this, right? This as what? You can think this as a tickets. Okay? So this is a ticket based. Issuer issues this ticket to K Bob. And if you look at this inside the tickets, there's a concept of a delegation. Remember we learned about delegation, right? If you look at these tickets, it says that K owner delegate this access right to whom? K Bob. So this yellow thing, I know that this is called authorization or delegation certificate, but it has two main concepts. The first concept is a ticket based, and second concept is use of delegation, this concept of delegation. Okay, so any question? Okay, now, so what happened is the Bob, right? So here's the Bob, right? Bob is trying to access this object, right? Bob is trying to access this object, this O1, right? But God is guarding this object, right? Protecting this object. So the Bob says, now it's concept of what? Ticket, right? So go back to tickets. Ticket has 4 components, right? The one of the components is what? Request, right? Request. So the Bob is going to request his tickets. Request saying that, hey, am I able to access this object 1? Okay. So the Bob. Okay. So let's just. I need more space. So the Bob. Actually, it's not really Bob. It's a K Bob, right? The K Bob, the public key of the Bob, requesting that, okay, can I, so this is request, right, to the God. But this request is, can I able to access, can I read this object O1, right? So this is a request, right? Remember the first component of the ticket is a request, right? And by the way, this request is signed by whom? Signed by K-Bob. Okay? But here's the important thing. When the Bob send a request, right? Remember, if you look at the tickets, it has to what? It has to, right? Maybe not in this diagram, remember the tickets, right? Okay, so the tickets, right? The cabin, actually in the ticket, cabin has to what? Presenting the ticket to the God, right? Same thing. In this case, the Bob, this is a Bob's request, but at the same time, Bob has to what? Presenting the tickets, yellow, to the God. So what is the yellow? Let me just write it down. The tickets, the K Bob, and then read. This is access right. Read object O1, right? So sorry, it's O1. Okay, and then signed by whom? The K owner, right? So this is a request. This is a request part, right? And then this is what? This is a tickets. So the Bob, actually K Bob, right? Presenting the ticket to the God along with the, along with the request, right? 2 things. So any question? Okay? So the yellow is a ticket, right? The yellow is a tickets.
I think you forgot a comma in the ticket.
Oh, yes.
Between read
Right.
and object.
Read and object.
Inside the K owner.
Oh, the K owner. Okay, so yeah. Good. Thank you.
And in between R and O.
Yeah. R and O. Good. Good. Thank you. Yeah, notation is very important. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So that's a tickets and the request, right? So the God, upon receiving these 2 things, right? God knows what? Owner is public key, right? God and owner, they are friends, right? Of course, the God knows what owners are public key. So what the God can do is, now the second step is a God can verify. Verify what? Verify these tickets. Because this is encrypted by the K owner's private key. But God knows K owner's public key, so he can read this, right? And then verify the tickets, right? And then the God can find, extract what? Extract K Bob's, the public key, right? This is a public key of Bob, right? From this, right? So he knows that, the God knows that this is what? This is a genuine K-Bob's public key, right? How? Why? Because God trusts owner, right? And owner issues these tickets to the Bob. God knows, of course, owner knows genuine public key of the Bob, right? So basically, there's a trust relationship, right? Since the God trusts owner, and the God really believe everything that is written in the tickets issued by the owner. So thus, the guard is knows that this is a genuine Bob's public key, right? So extracts what? K Bob, which is a public key, right? Okay, which is public key. So using this public key and apply this public key to signature, right? And then he can verify that what? R and O, right? So the access is granted. Any question? Okay. So that's the main idea of this authorization / delegation certificates. Okay, so once again, it has concept of tickets and it has concept of delegations, right? Okay. And now, the last thing that I'd like to talk about this paper is this diagram. Okay. This diagram, it really tells everything about this delegation and authorization certificates. Okay. So now let's just draw this diagram, right? And I'm going to just tell you the brief. I mean, I think you can find out. Now, having said this, you can find out this scenario, right? So basically, we have a server S, So I'm talking about the delegation. Okay, so we have server S, right? The server S. You know what? The server S you can think as the guard. Okay, the guard is protecting this server S, right? Or whatever the website, I'll just, okay, the paper kind of use a different example, but I just want to make it simple, right? So the guard is really protecting this object here in the server S, okay? So this is object, okay? And but if you look at the book, it has like a web page and whatever, right? But I want to really make this example really simple. So there's an object, okay? And then now the client, right? The client is trying to access this. By the way, this client is represented as a K4. Okay, so this is what? This is the public key of the clients. Remember, we're not going to use any name, right? So basically, this is K4, right? Principal K4, right? But I'll just say client. Okay, the K4, right? And so, but this owner, right? The owner, let's say, assume this owner of this object is K1. Okay? Remember, the K1 is public key, right? From now on, we're not going to use any name. Just K1, K2, like public key, right? Okay, the K1 is owned by this. And so since the K1 is the owner of this object, the K1 create a ticket called authorization certificate. It says K2, right? Sorry, it's like a square. It's a K2, right? And then let's say read, comma, okay, comma, and then object, right? And then signed by whom? Owner, K1. Okay, it says K1 delegate its access right, RO, to whom? To K2, right? And right now, I'm talking about the delegation, the keychain. Okay, the chain of delegation certificate. Okay, let's just it's called a chain of delegation certificates. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so now so there's the principal or the subject called K2. So there's basically, okay, so now there's a K2, right? And now the K2, since it has get the ticket, the K2 also can delegate the access right received from K1 to is another entity, another principal that the K2 trust. So now there's a K1, right? The K1 issues this, but there's another principal K2, right? Upon K2 receive this authorization certificates, right? What the K2 does is, now let's say K2 trust K3. Okay. This means the K1 trust to whom? K2, right? And now the K2 trust the K3. So the K3 and comma R comma O, right? And then what? The signed by K2. Okay, so that means, okay, and then the K2 delegates this access right to whom? The K3, since K2 trusts K3. Okay, now there's another subject called K4. See, there's another subject for the K4, right? Can you see the K4? So since the K3 trusts whom? The K4, right? And now the K3 is now, it's a delegate its access right to K4. Remember the previous example, the delegation, right? The Linda, right? Linda, right? Linda is basically the Emily is, not the Emily, yeah. Emily is the her mom, right? Remember? So Emily delegates the right to the Linda, right? But just in this case, let's say Linda has her younger sister. Okay? So the Linda, let's say her younger sister is Jennifer. So Emily called the Linda, could you tell your dad to change the reservation time? So Linda is, she's really lazy. So she called her younger brother, let's say Jake, right? Hi Jake, could you please call the dad and then change the reservation time, right? And then you know what, the Jake, he's also lazy, right? So the Jake, he is called his younger brother, let's say James, right? So he's just delegating his access right to, let's say from Linda to Jake and to James, right? So etc. Okay, the same thing. So the K3, right? Trust the K4. So what the K3 does is, I'm going to delegate this access right K4, right? And this is the access right, and assigned by whom? The K3, right? But so now can you see the K4? The K4 is the clients trying to access this object, right, through the God, right? So what the clients has to do, what the K4 has to do is, it also present, there are a couple of things that he has to present. Okay, by the way, this is what? This is ticket number 1, ticket number 2, ticket number 3, right? So this is a ticket number 1, and this is ticket number 2, and this is a ticket number 3, right? So what the client has to do is that you need to send a request to the God, right? And hey, I would like to access read and object, right? By the way, comma, object O, right? And then signs by whom? The K4, right? You know what? This is going to be long, so yes.
Isn't there a concern about privilege escalation if each ticket is just trusting the other
Okay,
completely?
okay, good. You know what? Let's not worry about that right now. Okay? I just want to focus on the chain of delegation certificates. Yes, that's important, but that's a minor issue. Okay? So first, let's just talk about let's just focus on the chain of delegation, okay? So we'll talk about that later, but let's just talk about the chain. That's the key crucial concept in this paper. Okay, everything else is minor. Okay, so now the ticket number 1, right? The copy and then the paste, right? So this will be presented to the God by the client. Okay, by the way, the client to request this object, it has to collect all the tickets. That's the client's responsibility. That's the responsibility of K4. The K4 must have ticket number 1, ticket number 2, and ticket number 3. Okay? Assuming that the client has all the tickets, copy, oops, paste, right? So that's a ticket number 2, sorry. And this is what? This is the ticket number 3, right? You know what? I have to move. This is really long, so oops. You know, I'll just leave it as okay. And then what? I don't know if you guys can see this. Let's just expand this all the way. Okay. And then the last thing is request, right? Request is signed by request is signed by, this is request, right? Which is R1. I'd like to read this object 1 and signed by K4. Right? So these 4 things, by the way, the last thing is the request, by the way. Right? And then this is a ticket number 1. This is ticket number 2. And this is ticket number 3. Okay, so now this is presented by the client, right? So the God knows the what? The God knows the K1s, the owner is what? The public key, right? So he can open this, applying this owner's public key, right? And then is find out the K2, right? Which is public key of the K2, right? And extract this K2 and apply here, right? And then you can open this, right? And then extract the genuine public key of K3, right? This is like genuine. And then using this, right? And open this guy and extract the K4. That's what the God is doing, right? Okay, now what I'm doing here is what? The verification process done by whom? The God, right? That's what I'm showing right now, right? And then extract the K4, right? And apply here. And then if this is like open it without any problem, right? Because the K4 is what? This is a private key. You know, there is private key because it's used with this square bracket. But this is a public key, right? Apply this public key to the private key, cancels out, and then you can get R and O, right? So finally, what is the conclusion after the verification process? R O is what? Granted. Okay, so any question? So that's the main, the key aspect of this paper, right? Okay, so now let's just, okay, so now if we can summarize this delegation chain, right? So now we are talking about what? Talking about the chain of delegation, right? From this, right? From this scenario, right? If I ask to write the chain of delegation certificate, right? This is like a contract between you and me, okay? You can say the what? The K1 delegate is access right to whom? K2. And then so this is delegation, right? This is called delegation. And then K2 delegate is access. Okay, so you know what? Usually they use this notation. Actually, this is actually used in a couple of other papers. Okay, so delegation access R, right? So this guy, right? This is, let's say this is R, and then this K2 delegate is access right R to whom? K3, right? And then K3 delegate is access rights to whom? To K4, right? Thus K4 what? If this verification process is done by the God, right? And after the verification is process done, the K4 is able to access R and O, right? This is granted. So you see that it's the verification process, right? It's really starting from the K1, like in this way. Can you see that? This is like a order. So first verify the K2, then extract the K3, and then extract the K4, right? Then using the K4, the God can read this request, right? See? K2, K3, then K4. So this is like order of verification. Okay, so I want to, from now on, let's say this is like our notation wise, let's say this is what? This is our chain of delegation certificates, okay? K1, K2, starting from the K1. So you know that K1 is what? The K1 is the owner, or sometimes could be God, right? Because God and owner could be the same guy, okay? But in this scenario, I just make it two different principles, okay? We have owner and then we have a God. Okay, so that's the main key point in this paper. Any question? Okay, any question? Okay, good. Now let's talk about the I mean, it's a minor issue, right? So the minor issues is, if you look at this book, the paper, right, they're talking about what? I mean, by the way, this is just minor issue. It's not really important, but so not the certificate chains. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, I mean, they're talking about like, but this is not really important, but it's this, in the delegation, this, like what? Yeah, I mean, okay, what? I mean, this like makes sense. I mean, it's like it's a common sense, because, for example, right? Let's just make it. Okay, by the way, this is a minor issue, right? If, let's say, if the access right is given by K2 is read and write, okay, for example, read and write, read and write and executable, right? Let's say it's, but then when the K2 delegate is access right, it can only give read, right, to K3. Okay, you know what? Okay, let's say the K1 delegate read and write access rights to K2, right? But then when the K2 delegate is access right to K3, right? Yes, it can. Its delegation right could be read and write, right? But it cannot. It cannot include the. Additionally, it cannot add executable, right? There's no way. So it's like, this is the access right. Then it's written given by K1 to K2, right? Now when the K2 delegate is access right to K3, the amount, the access right has to be either same as this circle or the less, right? And then the next one, when the K3 delegate to K4, the access right should be either same as this size or even less, right? Which is obvious. Okay, but that's like a minor thing, it's common sense, right? Okay, so any question? Okay, so basically that's the key idea, right? And by the way, if your group has a little bit more time, right, then you can go further and then talk about what? Talk about 2.4. Okay, I'm not gonna really talk about. So if you want to get an extra credit, I mean not extra credit. I mean if you just in case if you group has some time, right, then you can put this content to your group project. But it's not mandatory, by the way. Okay, they're talking about a little bit more based on this idea, right? But I don't think you're not gonna have any problem once you understand this concept, right? Once you understand this concept, I don't think you're not going to have any problem reading the remaining of the paper. Okay? So any question? Okay, so I'm going to stop.